For the first time in close to 12 years, the UFC touches down in Seattle, Washington, and with them they bring a former flyweight and bantamweight champion in Henry Cejudo, looking to knock off the rising contender Song Yadong. In the co-main event, we have a rematch of an LFA middleweight title fight from 2018 as surging middleweight Anthony Fluffy Hernandez looks to assert himself in title talks as he takes on Brendan Allen, who's looking to bounce back after having his winning streak snapped back in September by Nasruddin Imavov. This card has been marred by cancellations, postponements, and injuries, but the UFC has done a decent enough job in terms of putting together what they can and still delivering a 12-fight card, knock on wood, that they're still able to keep those fights intact come Saturday night. Reminder that this is the quick picks version of the UFC Seattle breakdown. Earlier this week, I dropped the MMA Lockcast talking about all 12 fights close to an hour long, which means for this segment, I'll just be getting right to the point of every single matchup, meaning I'll be leaving some of the details out for some of these matchups. So if you want more information and go to a little bit more in depth on a specific fight that you're questioning me about, go to the MMA Lockcast. I have the link in the description below, or just check out the YouTube page and check out the full card breakdown and you'll get your answers there. All right. Hope you're laced up and ready to go because we're off and running with the first fight of the night between Modestas Bukauskas and Rafael Cerqueira. Although I believe the line is a little bit too wide here, I expect the striking style of Bukauskas to shut down the BJJ black belt and Muay Thai of Cerqueira, and I think we'll see Bukauskas chip away at him and win this fight on the scorecards. Next up, Nursultan Ruziboev going up against short notice UFC debutant Eric McConico. McConico was scheduled to compete last week, so he is in shape and ready to go, and I expect him to go out there and put together a solid game plan to muzzle the aggressive and offensive style of Ruziboev. Look for McConico to try to utilize the same game plan as Joaquin Buckley, keeping Ruziboev on his back, keeping him out of danger, and eventually winning this fight on the scorecards. Next up, Nikolai Veretennikov going up against Austin Vanderford. Vanderford coming in on short notice and making his UFC debut here, and he is about 3 years removed from losing out on his Bellator middleweight title fight against Gegard Mousasi, but I think he is still capable of getting to that type of level by utilizing his wrestling and power striking approach. Look for him to keep Veretennikov on the defensive by using his wrestling and keeping him up against a cage. It might be dirty, it might be ugly, and it might be boring, but I think Vanderford will win this matchup on the scorecards. Next up, Ricky Simón going up against Javid Basharat. Simón is looking to buck a 3-fight losing streak. Unfortunately for him, he's going up against a very tough Javid Basharat who has the perfect style to shut Simón down. Look for Basharat to utilize stellar takedown defense and a superior striking game, picking apart Ricky Simón from distance and winning this fight on the scorecards. Next up, Abdul-Malik going up against Nick Klein. I think Abdul-Malik will be able to shut down the grapple-heavy approach of Klein, utilizing superior wrestling and scrambling, and eventually walking Klein down and landing big shots, putting him away in the first round. Next up, Andre Fili going up against Melquizael Costa. This should be a very close fight, as the odds indicate, but I believe Fili's strength of schedule, experience, and unorthodox striking approach will be enough for him to shut down the grappling of Costa, really touching him up from distance and winning this fight on the scorecards, but I wouldn't be surprised if it comes by split. Next up, Iwan Cutelaba going up against Ibo Aslan. This could either be a car crash or a little bit of a grind fest on part of the Cutelaba side here, which is why I'm more than intrigued by him as the underdog in the spot. If he can avoid getting bonked early in this fight, as Aslan normally puts his opponents away in the first round, I think Cutelaba can meet him with that aggression and power and overcome that and finish Ibo Aslan within the first 2 rounds. Next up, Alonzo Menifield taking on short notice UFC debutant Julius Walker. This should be a fun fight, but I believe the experience and power of Menifield will be able to take advantage of some of the striking defense flaws I've seen from Walker. Walker could surprise, but I have to go with the veteran here, and I think Menifield scores a knockout victory. Next up, Gene Silva going up against Melsik Baghdasaryan. This line is way too wide, considering that Baghdasaryan might be the best striker that Gene Silva has competed against in the UFC, but that still won't keep me from predicting Silva to win this matchup. I expect his activity and his power to touch up Baghdasaryan, who might be a little bit slow and suffering from ring rust considering his 1.5-year-long layoff, and not to mention returning from a torn labrum. Look for Silva to touch him up, win this fight on the scorecards, but the over 1.5 could be very interesting to take a shot on. Next up, Rob Font taking on short notice replacement Gene Matsumoto. Matsumoto was originally scheduled to fight Chris Gutierrez at UFC 313, but he is going to be coming in here to take on a high caliber opponent like Rob Font. Look for Matsumoto's damaging style, landing more effective strikes inside the pocket, and clearly showcasing that he's being more damaging. That should be enough for him to go out there and win this fight on the scorecards, as long as Font doesn't get too far ahead in terms of numbers, but Matsumoto's damage-based style will likely be too much for Font to deal with. Co-main event time, as we got Brendan Allen looking to go 1-1 against Anthony Hernandez here. Unfortunately for him, I think Hernandez is clearly in his prime, and I think we're going to see him utilize his classic Hernandez style, putting Allen through the ringer, through the spin cycle, pushing him against the cage, dragging him to the ground, and just being too much for him, and that would lead to Hernandez winning this fight on the scorecards. And that brings us to our bantamweight main event, as Henry Cejudo looks to avoid the first 3-fight losing streak of his career, going up against Yadong Song, who's looking to bounce back from a March loss to Petr Yan. I think that Song's striking style will end up being too much for Cejudo here. Cejudo might have some success to make this fight look closer than the odds indicate, but I still believe that the damage that Song will be able to inflict here will allow him to go out there and defeat Henry Cejudo on the scorecards. There you guys go. Quick picks for UFC Seattle. I'll be back later this evening for the Legacy Warriors podcast, breaking down LFA 202 for you guys. Reminder, KSW and Octagon also go down this weekend, and I'll have written breakdowns and track plays for those cards on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. Check the link in the description below. Otherwise, I'll see you guys later this evening. Peace.